Okay, so as far as some of the statutes are concerned, the multiple dwelling law, as I mentioned, it creates classifications of buildings in the city, Class A and Class B. Class A are for permanent residents. Class B are for non-permanent. Permanent, in fact, in this context, is defined as 30 days or more of occupancy. The exceptions, though, are for guests. When the resident is in the apartment and he or she has a guest, the guest is not considered to be a violation of the permanent requirement. Also, if there's a guest when the permanent resident is out of occupancy temporarily, the guest is not a violation as long as money is not exchanged. Now, this sort of dovetails, interestingly, with the roommate law in the real property law, to the extent that the roommate law says that a tenant can have a roommate. The law does not define what a roommate is. There's plenty of case law about the stories that arise when a roommate is in the apartment. The subleasing law of the real property law also comes into effect, a close cousin of the roommate law. The multiple dwelling law talks about the mortgagee's right to default the borrower if the building is not occupied legally. And in the context of trying to collect unpaid rent from a tenant, non-payment proceedings, one may have a problem with non-payment proceedings when the building is not occupied in a legal way. The fire code comes into effect when we're talking about transient short-term rentals. Safety is, of course, of utmost importance, and the fire code has different kinds of provisions for transient buildings versus permanent buildings. The New York City Building Code talks about how your building shall be built if it's a permanent or transient. The Construction Code talks about altering your premises for transient use and if that would be permitted. The Housing Maintenance Code comes into effect. Is there nuisance conduct in your building? Is it relating to permanent or non-permanent occupancy? A couple more. The zoning resolution deals with hotels and commercial endeavors and whether they're permitted in certain parts of the city and not. And of course, finally, the rent stabilization law has a big kicker in the short-term transient occupancy field because for one reason of many, a rent-stabilized tenant is not to be profiting from the benefit of having a rent-stabilized lease. If they are using Airbnb to make a profit, it could be a problem. And there's also, of course, the primary residency requirements for rent stabilization. If the tenant is vacating the apartments in order to rent out in a short-term basis, they could be facing problems in that respect as well. So just a quick overview, so Todd can then proceed with his stories and more.